front line of policing is loud, but the voices behind it, they're a lot louder and I think, frankly, a lot more interesting. Hi, I'm Bob Plaschke, and this is First Response. This is the #1 podcast that takes you behind the badge and uncovers real stories and experiences of first responders from all walks of life and the topics that shape public safety today. If you're curious about the guy or the gal behind the hero, and they are indeed truly heroes, and the topics that they care about, take a listen. This is kind of your front row seat to hearing some of the really interesting voices out there, and more importantly, the heroes. This podcast is sponsored by Pepperball, where I have the honor to serve as CEO. Pepperball creates non-lethal alternatives to guns police use to keep themselves and the public safe. Good morning. It's a really interesting topic today. I'm super excited to have Deputy Chief McDowell Jr. from the CMHA. Now, the CMHA, I got to get this right, is the, Chief, I've already forgotten. What is it? Cuyahoga?
Cuyahoga.
Cuyahoga.
Yes, Cuyahoga.
Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority. This is actually one of the oldest, I think it is the oldest housing authority in the United States. It was established in 1933. It serves over 55,000 residents in the greater kind of downtown Cleveland area. Super interesting. Deputy Chief McDowell is in effect managing, along with the chief, manages this 60-person police department that works in conjunction with the Cleveland Police Department in terms of providing safety and security to this housing authority. Chief McDowell, by the way, super experienced, 26 years in law enforcement. In the last 11 in kind of a command position. Came through the Cleveland Police Department on his way into this role. So, I didn't even know that housing authorities had their own police authority or police department. How does that work? Does that supersede the Cleveland Police Department? Do you work in conjunction? Kind of, who takes the calls? How does it all work?
All right. So it's an honor to be to have this conversation with you today. And so what happens is, we are what's called a resident-driven police department. So what that means is that, nearly 50 plus years ago, the residents of the CMHA Police Department decided that they wanted their own police department. So there were steps taken to enact laws and legislation that would allow the police department to form. And so along with that present day, we're called the Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority because we exist throughout the county in the state of Ohio. So we do have properties that are primarily in the city of Cleveland, but also in other first-ring suburbs such as Cleveland Heights, East Cleveland, city of Berea, as well as Oakwood Village. So typically we have concurrent jurisdiction in those communities. And ultimately, we also manage our own dispatch center, which most of the calls are routed through our dispatch center. From there, our officers are dispatched. But in some situations, other municipalities may respond, but in most cases, we are the primary law enforcement authority on all of our properties.
Interesting. And so just out of interest, can you provide mutual aid to Cleveland Police Department?
Absolutely. They are our partners. We work alongside with the U.S. Marshal Task Force, FBI, our municipal partners. We also work with our social service partners. I can best describe our organization as a model of service-oriented policing, because we recognize to best serve our population, we can't work in silos. So yes, we do have concurrent jurisdictions and we work with other partners, but for us, it's really about having a service orientation first.
It's interesting to me, and it's what I think makes U.S. policing really special, certainly special and unique around the world, is that each group of group of residents, as you would say, each group of citizens can form their own community and then can form their own police department, and that's why we have 18,000 agencies. It's kind of as a shout out to July 4th. It is the Minutemen, the militias that were established initially to fight the English, turned into local police forces, and then that history has pervaded such that every community gets its right and its choice to pick its own police and the own rules and kind of way it operates from a kind of a cultural perspective and from a local understanding. So that the Metropolitan Housing Authority would choose to do that makes perfect sense. In that context, is how you police different than what you experienced when you were on the Cleveland Police Department?
So one thing is, I came up through the Park District Police, where I spent the majority of my career, and I actually transitioned here about 7 years ago to take on the role as the Deputy Chief of Police to support the existing chief. But here's what I'll tell you. Most people have a misconception about working in this environment. The first is we provide our residents with what we call above baseline services. I would tell you our residents probably get better service than what you get in the average suburban community. But for the most part, we are primarily responsible for responding to a variety of calls that occur. We have our own detective bureau that manages roughly about 1,500 felony cases annually. We have a part-time SWAT team. We have members on federal task force. So we make sure that we are able to respond to a number of calls that may come in.
And to build on that, I saw in an old, more of a historic report that you had 2,400 serious crimes a year. 20% of those domestic violence, another 8% felony or felonious assault, as it's called. Is that more than average, less than average? Is that change how you have to do policing in that community?
Well, I'll tell you, we're in the people business, and if you look at crime on a national average right now, I'd probably say, crimes against persons, especially domestic partnerships, they're probably up both nationally. That's probably our biggest challenge right now because we're in a people service business. So I'm not exactly sure what the national average is, but I can tell you on a regular basis, it doesn't exactly change the way we police, but we are more mindful, especially in the city of Richmond. A police sergeant was recently killed responding to a domestic incident. So we pay attention to those national trends where officers are most likely to encounter violence. We train for those incidents. We regularly just look at our officers' performance to make sure that they're adhering to policy, the training, and the community standards. So for us, it's not so much about changing, but it's more so evaluating and ensuring that we are providing the service that our residents expect.
Makes sense. It's we talk a lot on this podcast about the changing nature of policing and how 20, 30 years ago, domestic violence, as an example, or mental health challenges were not a big part of policing, and now they really are, and that officers are now trained in de-escalation, trained in a lot of areas that you wouldn't have normally expected a young police officer to come in and have to learn and have to be able to deal with. That has to be a challenge. And I guess to some degree you've adjusted how you do your training and how you do your kind of evaluations so that they're better prepared for those kinds of situations.
It's funny you brought this up. I was recently responding to a couple LinkedIn posts about recruitment for the profession. Given the fact that the average person who comes into this profession has a high school diploma, They're between the age of probably 21 to 28 years of age. Policing sometimes is their first professional job. So the bigger challenge is for people, executives like myself is we have to adjust our views and how we've approached the job. Whereas, I think the expectation is similar, but at the same time, especially when it comes to dealing with mental health and all the other social issues that come up in society, no one has been able to remove police out of it. Everyone has come up with ideas with expanded response with social workers, but I can tell you from my experience, social workers are willing to help, but you still need the police to validate whether or not it's safe enough for a
Right.
social worker to respond. And then there are many cases where you still need the police to transport the person once a determination is made. So all of those factors come into play. But what's most important, when it comes to ensuring that your staff are meeting their goals, it's not about being punitive, but this is a very challenging job. And so when you consider all that is expected of an officer today, they need more support and guidance and less criticism from their superiors.
Yeah, no, I agree. I wanted to tell the audience that Chief McDowell has a master's degree in psychology, which is more rare than not in terms of the folks that I talk to. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So when you think about the psychology of policing, if you think about the folks, the officers on your force, my guess, and again, I can't statistically tell you this, but my guess is that they see more domestic violence outcalls than the average police officer. Does that psychologically, does that make them better at being more empathetic, or does it make them over time more hardened to the situation? Or is it both?
Well, I can tell you this is a very, very challenging environment. Oftentimes, it's not what they see, it's their inability to help or do more that becomes more challenging for the officer. Because at the end of the day, most of the people who come into this profession, they're here to serve. So when you see kids who experience violence, when you see domestic abuse, which is up, you always want to offer more, and that's probably more challenging than just what officers experience. But I also don't want to leave out our dispatchers. Our dispatchers are first contact for many of these requests for police services. These are individuals who are calling in because they're frustrated, they're screaming, they want an officer now, they don't want to hear an officer will be there when one's available. So so it's also important for us where we could give consideration to the fact that that dispatcher doesn't always know the outcome. They don't get to take a break. They don't get to just sit in their car or go to a local restaurant, have a bite to eat. They're stuck in a room for 12 plus hours. So you take into account all of the staff who have to address these concerns. It is very much challenging. And that's why I would say anyone who's working in public safety, wellness has to be a top priority.
Deputy Chief, you bring up a great point, and it's a kind of a miss on my part not to have had more of the 911 folks on this first response podcast, because to your point, I hadn't thought about it until you said that they sit for 12 hours straight and they hear. I mean, maybe it's even more challenging because they hear the worst day in everyone's life, and they don't have a chance to solve it, and they or at least they don't, and they in many cases they probably they don't have the time to find out whatever happened. In that sense, it's almost like they feel the stress of the community 12 hours a day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the other part about our environment is all of our calls aren't always violence. We do get calls for loud music, dumping complaints, any general municipal police call. We still field those calls. Our officers are still making traffic stops, trying to advance public safety in and around our facilities. So there's a lot that absolutely goes on. But what I'm most proud of is that when I get a chance to go out in the community, I hear the kids call our officers by name. I hear the kids or the residents say, I may not know the officer, but I see that him or her in the area often. All those things build trust because at the end of the day, when we talk about community, I think one of the most misused words is we separate those public servants as if they're not a part of the community. But you got to figure the average officer is working 12 to 16 hours a day. They are very much a part of this community as the people who own businesses here and who live here.
No, for sure. And to your point, they got in the business to serve. They got in the business because they have a big heart. They got in the business to serve their community. I'm going to come back to that trust piece in a second. But given your degree in psychology, I'm going to lean on you, so to speak.
Oh yeah.
This notion of, and I hadn't thought about it before, but this notion of it's tough enough to see the trauma and to see the hardship. I hadn't thought about it, but the fact that in many cases you walk away knowing that that in effect that you haven't really fixed the situation because it wasn't, it's well beyond your power to fix. That must take its cumulative toll on the person.
It does. And I want to circle back to what you asked about the police assisted referral program. This program has been in existence thanks to our Chief Gonzalez, who was a pioneer of this program. He put the police assisted program in place because he wanted to have a mechanism to really assist people in a meaningful way. I want you to think about this. You think about if you've personally experienced a tragedy or you've lost a loved one, it's common for people to say, call me if you need me. Most people, the average person, doesn't have time to tell their family and friends exactly what they need when they're grieving or they're going through a difficult time. Common policing historically says that when you have a victim of a crime, you give them a sheet of paper with a bunch of numbers that if you need anything, you call these people. Most people don't call, and here's why. They are so involved in their grief that they don't have time to figure out what they need. So the police assisted program is based on experience. So experience suggests that based on the officer's experience and the nature of the call that they're dealing with, they make the referral to our social service partners, and the social service partners will reach out to the family and say, here are our available resources based on the officer's referral. You can either take advantage of those resources or not, but it's not left up to you to figure it out. That's what makes this program unique. But let me correct myself. It's not a program, it's a part of our culture because it doesn't work if your agency doesn't have a service orientation. If it's just something you just say to people, they're not going to trust that what you're saying is actually a valuable resource. But for us, it truly is the way that we serve our residents. And it is our avenue of ensuring that they have the opportunity to get those resources they need after a tragedy.
This PAR, police assisted referrals, is something that I have not talked about, or I haven't been educated about. Tell me actually how it works on an actual call. Give me a kind of a real life situation.
I'm going to give you an example. Let's say, domestic violence. You brought up domestic violence. Let's use domestic violence, for example. So a domestic violence victim, whether they're a man or woman or other, they have the opportunity, number one, to get emergency housing. That information is afforded to them. We also make sure that in order to get that process moving forward, the officers will ensure that they have the police report number and explain to them the process to obtain a copy should they need it to actually move forward with getting emergency housing. But in addition to that, along with the victims' right forms, we give them some information to let them know that we have a partnership with one of the organizations, would be Beachbrook, which is a social service organization. The police report is forwarded to the social service organization to make sure that they have the backstory on the family, ensuring they have the correct information. Then they'll reach out and they'll say, well, hey, based on the age of your kids and what you're going through, if you need food or other resources, I'm going to be the one to help walk you through that process. So you don't have to start making a bunch of phone calls and trying to figure out how do you move forward through your challenging situation. That's the difference. And that's actually a difference maker as opposed to saying there are 10 numbers on here, call someone and hope that you get someone on the other line. This is a direct connect to services.
So it's a let me get you on the phone and let's get this sorted, and let me be there to walk you through the resources you need, as opposed to call me if you need help.
Correct. And historically, most people, the average person, I have this conversation with different people all the time, and I always ask, when you had a family tragedy in your life, and all your friends and family said, call me if you need me. I said, how many people call? I'd probably say 99.9% of the people say they don't call. And the people who make those statements, they are very much well-intentioned. But even if someone calls, and once they do make the call, are you really in a position to help? Well, we try to be the answer for those individuals.
That's fantastic. I think, and from at least the background, the material or the work I've done, it's 7,000 folks have taken advantage of that over the years.
Yes.
What a fantastic capability, and kind of hats off to Chief Gonzalez for. Did he develop this himself? Did he actually create this?
He came up with the idea along with a few social worker friends of his, and we have been the pioneer for this program. Now, there are a number of programs that exist around the country that really work, but what I can tell you is our approach is really unique, but it still comes back to what really matters is you have to hire the right people for the work that we do, with the understanding that at the end of the day, this badge that we have, it carries a great deal of authority and influence. So we try to use it to influence people in a more positive way.
No, it's fantastic. I did notice, and maybe it's why, based off Chief Gonzalez and your leadership, is that you're one of the first housing authorities to have achieved CALEA certification, which I've heard about. I don't really understand. And you just got your 9th reaccreditation in 2024.
That's right.
What is CALEA, and does it, is this like ISO 9000 for us on the business side? Is it a lot of paperwork, or is it something more? And I don't mean to be diminutive about that, but is it more than just paperwork and certification?
Yes.
What is it?
It's more. So CALEA is a national accreditation process, and it's an opportunity for the CALEA assessors, which are typically chiefs from someplace else in the country. They evaluate your policies and your standards, and to make sure that you're actually achieving those standards. And as part of the process, you have to ensure that you're constantly updating your policies and your training against which are suggested best practices as well. But here in Ohio, we have another governing body called the Ohio Collaborative. So they work kind of in partnership with one another. So it ensures that the standards for Ohio police officers are also being met, which are primarily around those high liability policies like your pursuit policy, your use of force policy, your early intervention policy, but most importantly, your training is ensuring that you're keeping up with all of that. So it's a very rigorous process. We're pretty much evaluated probably about every other year, whether it's an on-site visit or they're evaluating our policies electronically. It is the gold standard of law enforcement, and we've been able to achieve accreditation consistently because of the great work of our staff and our leadership.
So the typical resident wouldn't feel any different one way or the other in the context of having the certification, but what it shows itself in the form of all of the processes that you use to create a better quality of training, a better quality of service. So they'll see it in that context.
Yeah, they'll see it, and it actually does matter to the residents, because one thing is they want to know that their police department is consistent with best practices. They want to know that their police department is innovative. They want to know that we are doing what I always call is what we agreed to do. And but the other thing is agencies do not have to participate in the accreditation process. So we voluntarily invite this process as a means of maintaining trust, and legitimacy for what we do.
That you raised that word trust. I want to go back now. Again, as a subject matter expert in psychology and human psychology, the notion of trust between the community and the police, as I've discussed in many of these episodes, unfortunately, that trust has eroded. I think less than half of Americans believe that the police in general can be trusted. So more people distrust the police than trust them, which I think is a very sad commentary, I should say, on what's happened over the last 20 years. Tell me, from your experience, what are the factors that have eroded that trust, and what are the things that you and your department are doing to try to rebuild that trust?
Well, here's what I'm going to tell you from my professional perspective on the word trust. I think it's the most overused word and the most misunderstood word when it comes to public safety. And I say that in the sense that you quoted statistics, but those statistics are based upon those people who chose to answer those particular questions. But trust foundationally is the heart of everything that we do. I need my staff to trust me first before I can get the community to trust me. The staff have to trust my leadership. They have to trust my vision. They have to trust that I'm going to be consistent first. Now, when I do this well, then we get the other part in the community right. Now, let me define trust for me operationally. Trust is that I am doing what I agreed to do, and I am building an emotional connection to the work of service. Now, I will say, when people say they don't trust the police, that's a true statement for that individual. But if we really had to peel the layers back in the conversation around trust, most people, the good percentage of people, they know that they need the police to maintain social order. But it's not that people don't trust the police. And then we even have to break down who are those people. But it's just there are key moments in where trust are eroded, specifically when it comes to maybe dealing with mental health, because some people may feel that police officers aren't trained or credible enough to make those decisions, specifically when it comes to use of force incidents where it results in a serious injury or death. There are few people who may have a lack of trust because you're talking about having the authority to take someone's life. But I will tell you, it is the greatest challenge, but it is also the greatest opportunity, because our responsibility as public servants is to model trust, but we also have to extend trust first. See, it's not something that you just demand, it's something that you have to extend. And here's what I take total responsibility of. This is why I love the profession. This is why I love these conversations, is because I get to have a conversation about what trust really is and what our responsibility is when we extend trust, because oftentimes people really don't have an understanding of what it means, especially in a hostile situation. But we try to train our officers is that is your opportunity to give that person an experience that they least expect by slowing it down and listening more and talking less. But trust really comes from, if we go back to the accreditation, you go back to your mission and vision, are you really doing the things that you said you would do? And I can tell you, I work in an urban environment. It is one of the poorest communities in the top 3 cities in the United States, mostly African American and other. I've worked in suburban communities. I've worked in other police departments. But here's what I'll tell you, in the 7 years that I've been here, it's been the greatest surprise, because more people in this environment will show appreciation to officers here than I have in other communities. And I get to tell that story when I get to, on platforms like this and in other places, because most people would think it's the opposite, but people who live and work down here will tell you it is challenging. Don't get me wrong, I'm not being naive, but more often than not, the story that's not being told is our officers are told thank you and we appreciate you more often than people are sharing those other stories.
Well, no, and I think that is the challenge with social media, the challenge with, to your point, these generic surveys, they either intentionally or unintentionally cast a incorrect light generically, and then in this case on policing. And I couldn't agree with you more. What I always tell my friends is, let me ask, when you call 911, what is your level of trust? And the answer is, it's going to be, my guess is it's going to be pretty high, because you need it. You need that courageous person to come assist you in your worst day. And and therefore it's not likely when they show up, you're going to say, "Hey, I don't trust you." Right. I mean, it's basically you're and so I think when it gets down to the individual kind of experience, I do think that becomes less of an issue. I think it just becomes more of a generic issue when you see something on the news. I do love the way that you've talked about the training, and back to the CALIA as a gold standard, that you're training the officer to create an environment of trust, and to show to the person that they're engaging the respect, and that they will give them the benefit of the doubt walking into the situation. And to your point, by slowing things down, by de-escalating, by creating time and space, all those things give the officer the chance to extend the hand of trust, of which then hopefully can then be extended back.
Absolutely. One of the biggest misconceptions is that trust is earned. Trust is given. That's why, when you read the law enforcement code of ethics, it starts with your first fundamental duty is service, and then everything else follows. Then the last line is, this is your chosen profession before God. So when you take your oath of office, that's society extending trust to you. Distrust is earned. So when we have conversations about whether people trust the police or not, I'm honest about myself about where distrust was earned. So when you can acknowledge where distrust is earned, then you can begin the process of repairing trust with those who are open to
it. Fantastic, Chief or Deputy Chief. It's interesting. I always tell people, they say, what should I think about with when I interact with police officers? I say a couple things. One is, I say, remember, you have no idea where they just came from, and what kind of a traumatic situation they may have seen. So you might, you get pulled over on a traffic stop, you might be a bit more empathetic in that context. The other thing I said is that they're trained through lots and lots of interactions with citizens. They hear 99% of the truth, but they do hear 1% of the mistruth. So they are very good at spotting when people are not telling them, not being honest. And so the best thing you can possibly do is be honest. And I guess to that point, they're honest with you. They're giving you trust. You need to kind of respond in kind, right? You need to say, I'm going to acknowledge that, and I'm going to give the trust back. So I think that's fantastic. Well, Chief, I hate to say it, but I think we've kind of run out of time. I only have one last question to ask you, and that is, we typically make a donation in your name, because you've taken the half hour to sit here and kind of educate me and educate our audience in what donation or what charity can we make a donation for you today?
If you make a donation to the Cleveland Food Bank, that would be amazing. The Cleveland Food Bank here is working diligently to feed as many families here in a greater Cleveland area. And if that's an acceptable place to make a donation, I would be honored for you to move forward with that donation.
We will do exactly that, Deputy Chief. Well, and Deputy Chief, thanks again for joining First Response. Folks, every time I do one of these podcasts, I walk away with a new insight. and I'm just super grateful for it. In this context, there's a couple of insights for me, that things I take away. And that one is this definition of trust, and that trust is given, not taken. And that trust, the community has given trust to the officers. That's the first they trust the community, trust the officers, and the organization that manages those officers with the trust of the community. And then those officers have to give trust to the folks that they come in contact with, and I think that's fantastic. The second insight for me, and I'm going to make sure and get some 911 folks on here, is that while officers themselves encounter this kind of challenge every day, and the 911 officers, the people that you call 911, they encounter the same challenges themselves, even in a more aggressive way. And I think we got to remember that when you make that phone call, you're talking to someone who hears hundreds and hundreds of challenging calls every week. It's just something to remember. Folks, thanks for taking the time to listen to First Response. This is the number one podcast relating to emergency responders and policing, and the role policing makes serves in the United States today. And this is sponsored by Pepperball, where I have the honor to be the Chief Executive Officer. So until next time, be safe out there. Thanks very much.